implicate Donald Trump at all. But on the other hand, it's not as good as it looks. The large chunk of the speech mentions the fact that we're sending 800 troops to the Baltic republics and to Poland, which is actually a mad thing for Britain to be doing. And our policy towards Russia has become almost as insane as our former policies towards Iraq.
But she's drawn a distinction
between different kind of lunacy.
She's drawn a distinction between foreign wars of intervention and supporting NATO.
Well,
and that's what the Baltic deployment is.
I'm not quite sure what this distinction is. The supposed Russian aggression we're also frightened about, which involves a voluntary departure by the old Soviet Union from hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory, and its reduction to a country of military and economic insignificance, so that it's now got a smaller GDP than Italy, and we still go on about it as if it was a terrifying superpower about to seize the continent, and act accordingly by building up the very fears in Eastern Europe, and particularly the Baltics, which we then claim through NATO to be soothing. It's a very, very odd posture. And one of the very few sensible things which Donald Trump has said about foreign policy is that he thinks that NATO is obsolete. It is obsolete. It's as obsolete as mounting an alliance against the Austro-Hungarian Empire or Napoleon Bonaparte. NATO was an alliance against the Soviet Union. It's gone.
The Foreign Secretary has also said that we need to think afresh how we handle Syria. He's even hinted that if he wants, Mr. Assad could be allowed to run for elections. That's just recognising, I would suggest, that Mr. Assad is safe as long as the Russians are backing him, and that we really have no influence there.
I mean, I think there's a danger. I mean, when we look at what's happened over the last few months in terms of, what the Foreign Secretary has said, and, to be clear, it all started with Nigel Farage being the first to meet Theresa May, and it's set this tone by which we're going to try and normalise a president who is not normal, and his intentions for the world are not normal. They're not things that we necessarily
but I asked you about Syria and the British
that
position.
might be a reflection of realities on the ground, but you look at something like Trump's statements regarding Israel, which, Theresa May displeased many in favour of a peaceful solution in that region, including most of Europe, by allying Britain to the new US president in a way that was a change of tack for the UK, and the wrong change.
I would suggest the Foreign Secretary's statement is simply a recognition that Syria is now a Russian sphere of influence.
Oh, it's an extraordinary pullback from the previous position of this country, which had been to pretty much to declare itself for the overthrow of Assad. And I think it's a recognition that that policy has been defeated. There is still talk, I think, of safe zones being set up in Syria this morning, which I think some people see as a dangerous return to an attempt to intervene by the
That's for
United States.
refugees, is that right?
Well, supposedly, yes, but it could develop into more calls for no-fly zones, and we all know that the military complications that would lead to. So I don't think it's entirely and totally over yet. But certainly it does seem to me to be that one of the most dangerous policies which we have adopted over the past several years has come to an end, and the absolute refusal to even begin to see the possibility that the Assad government might survive has been rather quietly, but
stitched.
But well, yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because we've got a lot to cover.